Thank you, Val. That was really good. I very much enjoyed that session and I learned a lot. So thank you very much for moderating that session. We are going into our very last trivia round. So just a reminder, do your best. Everyone can win. We're sure you'll do a great job. And coming up next in about 5 minutes, we will have our final fireside chat and on misinformation, disinformation. So please tune back in 5 minutes. and welcome back. We are here now for our fireside chat with Meredith Wallace, Director of Business Intelligence with Next 5, and Dr. Kathleen Carley, who's a professor of societal computing in the School of Computer Science for Informed Democracy and Social Cybersecurity, Director of the Center for Cybersecurity at Carnegie Mellon University. What a mouthful. That's incredibly accomplished. I'm sure you will tell us all about that. Our topic today is going to be, what are we going to do about disinformation, misinformation? So Meredith, please come to the stage. Dr. Kathleen Carley, please come to the stage.
Hi, Elizabeth. Thanks so much for that. Dr. Kathleen Carley, I'd like to just, not waste any time at all. Can you please tell us what is misinformation? What is disinformation?
Sure. The difference between the two of them is a matter of intent. With disinformation, it's information that the sender knows is inaccurate and sends it anyway, often with the intent to harm. Whereas misinformation is information that the sender may not know at all that it's inaccurate, and they're just sending it.
So this has been somewhat a relatively hot topic since, at least for me, the 2016 election and the onset of COVID and everything. But you've been doing this for decades. So how did you get into it, and what do you recommend for up-and-comers?
So I actually got into studying information diffusion in general because I was very interested in how who you know affects what you know, and how what you know affects who you know. And I got into that because I read science fiction. So what I would recommend to people is to learn graph theory and to read science fiction.
So is there anything interesting you've read in science fiction growing up that you saw come to life?
Millions of things, but I would say basically almost everything that they suggested on Star Trek would be one. There's actually a book by the guy who played Jim Kirk, that basically saying how he invented the 21st century, but also a lot of the things that were talked about by Asimov in the Foundation trilogy, we now have prototypes of many of those things, such as the Prime Radiant is nothing more than a laptop.
Right, and like video messaging, like we're doing right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, fun. So do you believe, when it comes to misinformation and disinformation, do you believe that this is a technology issue or a human issue? It seems to really be taking off from my perspective with the proliferation of technology and digitalization, but do you believe it's more technology or human related?
Actually, I believe it's both. We've always had disinformation, right? As long as there have been humans, there's been disinformation. But what's different now is that you can send the messages at scale across geographical boundaries, across cultures. And so technology aids and supports that. And with the new technologies for creating, fake images and for creating synthesized text, the potentials are actually growing for creating disinformation.
Yeah, and I remember a study you recently did during COVID revealed that the United States tends to spread more misinformation than any other country. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So what we did was as soon as, it was in January of that year, we said, look, COVID, this is going to be big. So we started tracking it, but we decided to track it worldwide. And then we just simply took our data and, tried to put locations on places, and then looked at, for disinformation stories, where, who sent them and who retweeted them, right? And what we saw was that Americans tended to retweet disinformation stories from the US more than any other group. Americans tended to retweet disinformation stories from anywhere more than any other group. So it was like, what are we doing here? We're crazy.
That is pretty wild. What kinds of technologies do you foresee in the future that will help us catch these things, or to validate our sources, or stop it in its tracks?
Well, I don't think it's going to be just technology. First off, I think there's going to have to be new policies and new legislation that actually enforce things about spreading disinformation. And the new things that I think will let you catch things are improved platform independent approaches for detecting bots and trolls and hate speech, things like that. But also if we could design techniques for teaching critical thinking at scale, but critical thinking for the modern age, for this new cyber mediated world where the old techniques don't work, right? Like you used to be told, oh, go out and read 3 or 4 sources, and if they all, if they don't all say the same thing, then it's probably not true. But that doesn't work now because so many of you don't know if those sources are owned and operated by the same group. And so our traditional skills don't really work as well.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So you mentioned you would like to see some changes in policy. Do you believe that it's up to policymakers to solve the problem, or do you think that the burden is more on the social media companies or technology owners? I know Facebook's having a bad week. I don't want to only point fingers at them.
Yeah, no, they definitely are.
Twitter and others as well. Do they have the burden, or is it the governments of the world that have the burden to solve it?
Oh, I don't think it's just the government or just the platforms, but it's also, the customers, the people, and it's the scientists, and I've been advocating that we put together these kind of national boards in each country with all the different kinds of stakeholders to come up with solutions, because part of it's education, part of it's training, part of it's the platforms have to change. But, if let's say Facebook became perfect tomorrow with not spreading any disinformation, right? It wouldn't matter because the information would just go to other platforms and get respread. So unless they're all going to agree and all do the same thing, it can't be just a platform thing.
That's so interesting. And what kinds of methods that are already in place have you seen that have been helpful? I understand you're detecting a lot of these things just in the science work that you're in research you're doing. But what are the most successful ways to slow it down or stop something?
Well, I mean, it is true that if you remove certain messages, it does slow down its spread somewhat on that particular platform. But if you just tag it, it can actually backfire on you. But one of the things we've seen that appears to be more successful than other things is just simply making people aware of the kind of disinformation they're likely to see and why, but presenting that to them in ways that are integrated with their belief system, right? Because a lot of disinformation gets to you and makes groups vulnerable because it preys on a belief system that is antagonistic to theirs, right? So if I want to convince, teenage or grade school boys that girls are bad, I'm going to buy into their story about that girls are bad and tell them all these other things that support that aren't true. So to stop it, you have to build into their system, but then counter it.
Yeah, so when I was at CISA, we tried something brand new. Chris Krebs did this. He set up a rumor control page where we literally took some of the crazy stuff that was flying around on social media about the election and other things or COVID and tried to explain why it wasn't true and why you should go to the CDC or go talk to your elections officials, not just believe everything you hear. And I was pleasantly surprised by how well received it was by the American public. And we even were able to downgrade super classified intelligence about what the Iranians were doing and publish that overnight. And that was well received as well. And I was just really excited to see that it was taken well. So it's important to know who the authoritative sources are.
As long as they remain trusted and credible, right? So a lot of these fact-checking sites, everybody loved them when they first came out, but now some of them are starting to feel like have particular political agendas. So then the trust in them is dropping. So they have to remain impartial and trusted.
That's so interesting. And speaking of that as well, I want to come back to something we touched on in a previous conversation. You mentioned the use of bots in adversarial ways earlier in the conversation, but you mentioned that there's also good uses for them. And would you like to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So bots are like completely automated accounts that can do things like chat or whatever. And a common use of them is to kind of get news and collate it to reduce the amount of news you need to read. But another example of a really good use of bots is that in areas that are prone to a particular kind of disaster, like in Indonesia tsunamis, bots are actually useful for sending out warnings on a repeated basis. The tsunami's coming, go here. The tsunami's coming, go here, and that's an excellent use of them.
Oh, that's really interesting. And that's the same. So bots can also be used for things like advertising and other business purposes too, right?
Yes. And in fact, the same kind of bots that are often used for advertising, the same technology is often what's used for disinformation. Okay. But there's two kinds of bots that are used very frequently for disinformation. One is the amplifier bot that sits there and they start retweeting or resending out information that's disinformation, just making sure it gets to the top of your inbox because they're just resending it out so fast. The other kind is the kind that actually builds communities, that actually links people together. And when you can link people together and get them more densely connected, information will go through their group really fast. So if you can use bots in this way, you can then you've created a group that you can prime for disinformation, and then they'll all pick it up really fast.
I'm picturing some sci-fi bots on bots future war.
Actually, we've seen bots on bots wars actually occurring. Yeah.
Oh, what's that like?
A lot of messages flying past that often degenerate into like, this is just nonsense. But yeah. Yeah, we had an old one between Saudi Arabia and Russia. It was kind of funny watching it.
Oh, wow. That is really funny. What were they talking about?
Just why the other country was harming them.
Oh, they do that in just person to person too.
Yes, that's true.
Too funny. Well, are there any other, I mean, you're an authoritative source, let's be honest. And this is all about finding the authoritative sources that you can trust. Are there any other major myths out there you would like to dispel while we have you?
Well, one is people have this feeling that if something becomes disinformation, it's like all types of disinformation are equally bad and they're going to last a long time. And most disinformation actually goes away after a couple of days, and a lot of it is just kind of just nonsense disinformation, right? Like the story that the canals of Venice had been so cleaned up due to COVID that the swans and dolphins had come back. Okay, that was good news for a few days, then it was gone. Or the tsunami, the picture where you show for every kind of disaster that has big windstorms, they always show the giant wind over whatever the tallest thing in the area is, like over the Eiffel Tower, over the New York, the Empire State Building or whatever. So a lot of disinformation goes away. The kind of disinformation that is harder for people is the part that is really deeply embedded and that isn't all disinformation. And particularly the kind that is associated with conspiracy theories. And that's the kind of disinformation you have to be especially careful of, because a lot of the information that's told is actually true, but it may be grounded in a particular disinformation fact. But then supporting arguments are often done using illogic. And so that's another thing that's harmful. So disinformation is not just about finding the facts.
That's so helpful. What a great way to put it. We do have a couple questions from the audience, and I know we only have a few minutes left, so I want to make sure we get to those. So the first one is, how do you trust the people you are getting together? Imposter DNS data sites. I'm not entirely sure what that means. So maybe I'll just move to the next one. How do you really know where a website or a DNS originates? With companies like Intrepid and Net Abstraction doing good with website, DNS data is being hidden, and how do you really know who to trust?
So that's the $1 million question right now. Trying to disentangle and find the true source for disinformation is the thing we're all working on, but we don't have a perfect answer for that. I wish I could tell you we did, but we don't. One of the things that people do is what they call playbook approaches, where they say, look, this is the kind of disinformation that typically comes out of China, or this is the kind that comes out of Joe Schmo. And so when I see those kinds of stories, I'm going to attribute it to them or that country or whatever, because it's what would be natural for them to do, which is not proving anything. I don't see how that would ever stand up in a court of law, but it is kind of an approach that people use. But the question of who do you trust is, I think, a very different question. I mean, I think one of the problems with a lot of the sites is they let you basically friend anyone and to automatically follow anyone who follows you, creating these enormous, ridiculous networks, right? But if you actually limited yourself to people you knew in real life, right, or that really had a physical presence, the amount of stuff here would be totally reduced.
It's so interesting. And yeah, going back to what you were saying about attribution, we have the same issue with like traditional cyber hacking. I was just listening to, I was at a cyber.gov this morning, and I was listening to a lot of our government leadership talking about the importance of attribution, but how difficult it has become in this digital age to be certain about who you're attributing to. Just because it looks like it's targeting a certain group for a certain reason doesn't necessarily mean it's from China or Russia or even backed by a nation state to begin with.
Absolutely.
It's tricky times.
Yeah. I mean, there are various terror groups actually that are busy spreading disinformation and sending stories like, let's get this state to remove themselves from the union and things like that. So, and sometimes and a lot of disinformation is even just spread by kids for fun, right? They had this huge manhunt after one of the games in England because these kids thought it would be fun to send a note that their little brother was missing. And they sent a picture of this little kid who was actually the poster child for autism and was actually, I believe, an adult at the time they sent the message. But they just thought it'd be fun, and it led to this huge manhunt.
Oh my goodness. Well, I'm going to shift over to take another question from the audience. Dr. Carley, can you please recommend a site for information? You mentioned so many sites are particularly influenced.
So one site that we often use is Snopes. Another one is Hoaxy. Those are ones we often use. And PolitiFact is another one we've used. But those are ones that I often look at.
Can you describe them a little bit? I've never heard of any of those, actually.
So PolitiFact is a fact-checking website that is basically only focused on elected officials and their claims, and it just simply rates their claims as to whether or not they're right or not, or accurate or not. Whereas Hoaxy is a more academic product, but it basically will take various social media data and based on a variety of approaches, more machine learning approaches, tries to say whether or not it's true or not. And then Snopes is actually looks into a variety of different messages. And I believe Snopes is one that actually combines information from different fact-checking sites together. But it actually organizes things by storyline, by year, etc. So you can find a whole bunch of things. But it's more human vetted, right? You can send them in a question, and then they actually go in and look it up and try to figure out. And they explain what's true or not true, much in the way you described the system you guys built.
That's really awesome. I had not heard of that before, so I'm definitely going to take a look. Let's see. So let's see what the next question is. How do we educate the greater community on sourcing factual data? With COVID, for example, lives are on the line more often than ever and are reliant on factual data. How do we collectively pivot towards fact over fiction?
Well, I think with COVID, you have to understand that a lot of people are using fiction or disinformation because even though they know it's not true, they don't trust the institutions to support them. So, for example, there's a lot of homeopathic medicines that have been suggested for communities, like, oh, to prevent COVID, drink green tea. Or in your community, wash everything with this particular enzyme or whatever. And a lot of groups follow those because they feel, look, I can't get to the hospital. If I could get there, they're not going to treat me anyway because I'm not of the right ethnic group or race or don't have the money. And so I might as well do what works, what I found my mothers and brothers and uncles and aunts doing that works for them, for other diseases in the past. So it's not as simple as simply educating people on factual data for medical data. It's also a matter of making sure that they have access to the resources and access to medicines and so on. The other thing I would say is getting ahead of the curve. That is knowing realizing that a lot of the disinformation stories that come out, when they come out, they're more likely to spread if if a standard news agency picks it up, or if a celebrity talks about it. So to get ahead of the curve, train your celebrities, get the soap operas out there to give factual data as part of their everyday shows. People will believe that. Yeah. In the same way, that's the same kind of campaign they use to get people to stop smoking as much. The other thing is to look at what kind of disinformation it has just hit nationally, and then go out to the communities that are likely to believe it early and start building campaigns against that kind of disinformation within a day of it coming out nationally, because they're just going to pick it up and spread it.
Yeah, I remember, this isn't necessarily true information, but I remember Saturday Night Live did a funny map one day where they overlapped, or they presented a map that they said was the election map, and they said, oh, look at all that red, and they said, oh, actually, that's our COVID map. And it was all in the South where you'd find the Republicans, and
Yep.
It was just funny how that happens sometimes. So next question, I believe we have time for one or two more. What do you think is coming next after we figure out the right technologies to combat disinformation?
So first off, don't expect all disinformation to go away, right? I think that after we're able to mitigate it and slow it down a bit, the next thing you're starting to see are things that work at changing human behavior so that humans are more resilient, even in the face of disinformation. So that they, even if they fall for it once or something, that they are able to recover quickly. So I think resiliency technology is one of the things that's important.
That's a great answer. And that's definitely, again, I've been to several cyber conferences this week. It is Cyber Awareness Month. So that's definitely been the recurring theme, is all about resilience, especially with digitalization. And okay, let's see, one more. Do you have any thoughts for women and students breaking into the workforce?
Get a mentor. Have a senior person who can mentor you, or several of them, and I think that's very important. And I would say go for what you really like to do.
That's really great advice. I certainly wouldn't be anywhere near where I am today without fantastic mentors, and it's important to follow your passion too, which you've clearly done. I think you're just so brilliant, and really, really enjoyed this conversation. So thank you so much for your time today. I'm going to hand it back over to our lovely host, Miss Elizabeth Minez. Thank you so much for having us, and thank you to the Cyber Guild and Uniting Women in Cyber for this conversation. This is really important stuff. So
thanks for having me.